Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Your Number One Fan podcast. I'm your host, Kim Spencer, your number one fan. Episode topics will vary with the ultimate goal of providing the inspiration, encouragement, and tools for you to create your most authentic, happy life. I want this to be your weekly comfort podcast that also gives you a little kick in the butt to live your life to the fullest and not care what anybody says. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the good stuff. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Your Number One Fan podcast. I'm excited to have Michele on today. We've actually been connecting over the years with our online businesses, and she's been awesome to look up to. She's been through quite a few pivots in her life and is very successful now, if you don't mind me saying. And I do I do want to kind of get into her journey to where she is now and touch on the mental health part of it, but also just the confidence that she has to do all of this, because I know it's hard to put yourself out there, and it is also hard to make such big pivots from corporate world to a brick and mortar play cafe, and now being really online as an entrepreneur and helping a bunch of other people do the same thing as you do. So basically, what I think we should start with is explaining what exactly a play cafe is and how you got into that. And then we'll go from there. So thank you again for coming on. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So, I've always had kind of the entrepreneurial spirit. I was always the kid with, the lemonade stand. I used to charge my neighbors to deliver their mail. I was always that
Wow.
kid that was trying to start my own business. But I ended up going the very traditional route with my education. So, I went to college and then I went to graduate school. I wanted to work in banking. I went, for a master's degree in economics. I ended up working in the corporate marketing world just because of an internship that I happened to apply for. So that was kind of my first hard pivot. I had no marketing experience. It really wasn't where I pictured myself. I wanted to be an investment banker.
Okay.
But again, I ended up taking this random internship just because I wanted to work at a corporate office. It was for Wegmans. And I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with marketing, but it really never satisfied, again, that entrepreneurial bug that I always had. So after I had my first child, I ended up leaving. It was just not a great situation. The environment that I was working in was just not suitable for what I needed at that time, especially because I had a super long commute. And I figured, this is a great time to open a business. If it's not now, then when?
Right.
So I started planning, I started crunching numbers, and I really wanted to do something that I could involve my family in. And I really wanted a business where I could bring my child to work. Now, looking back, I laughed so hard that I thought that I could, work alongside my child and bring him and he would just be well behaved and,
Yeah.
it would be all rainbows and butterflies. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But that's kind of where the idea of opening a play cafe came from, because I really wanted to open a business. And at this time, this was back in 2015, I really didn't view online businesses as real businesses. Now, of course, I know that that's not accurate. I really was of the mindset that, you had to have a key to a storefront. You had to be, a brick and mortar facility to be considered a legitimate business. So that was, obviously the route that I took. So a play cafe is essentially, mine was a coffee shop mixed with a play area. So parents could come, they could, grab a latte or espresso drink or something like that and just kind of relax and connect with other parents while their kids play. And we did birthday parties and things like that. And I did that for about 5 years. We ended up opening a second location, and then we ended up deciding to move back to our hometown. So we decided to sell our business, which is also something that I help people do now, because play cafe ownership is a lot more difficult than people, or, including myself, imagined. So we sold, and now I help other people open indoor playgrounds and play cafes and kind of live out their entrepreneurial dreams.
That's awesome. I love the idea of a play cafe. And I see more I don't know if they're popping up or not. Maybe now I'm just more aware
No,
of
they absolutely are. In
Yeah.
Buffalo especially, there's been 4 that opened just in the past year alone. And
Yeah.
it's definitely, now that we're kind of exiting COVID, I think people need connection now more than ever. And I think a lot of these little kids who were born, during the pandemic, during COVID, they're lacking that socialization. The parents feel like they're not ready for preschool or kindergarten. So I think not only is this business model more popular now than ever, I also think it's a lot more needed because,
Mhm.
again, these children lacked that socialization in the early years. And I think parents are kind of utilizing these types of businesses as a way to kind of catch up and, not necessarily get ready for preschool or kindergarten academically, but socially, and just
Yeah.
being able to, exist in a public space without, the space restrictions and things like that. So they're definitely popping up now more than ever. It's not your imagination.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And I'm sure it was something that the whole entrepreneurial thing is like you look to add something that's not there or improve on something. So that's cool because I feel like if that didn't already exist, like maybe I wouldn't have thought of it, but it's such a good something that's needed and something cool. I know that I'm going to be probably going. The only thing I worry about is the germs, but you can't
Yeah,
you can't really worry too much
absolutely.
about that.
And
Yeah.
that definitely, all parents are, of course, worried about that, but that probably comes from having a child like during a global pandemic. I think that cleanliness is much more at the forefront now. And I've been seeing a lot of these types of businesses kind of move away from those smaller toys and more towards toys that can be cleaned easier and that can be
Yeah.
sanitized easier or that they can rotate and put clean versions out. So
Yeah.
I totally, totally get that. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of this business idea had my husband not been traveling for work at the time.
Hmm.
So we went to Chicago. That's how the idea kind of formed because they're all over the place in Chicago. And I was like, you know what? We don't have one of these near us. And we did have some similar concepts, but they were much bigger. They were more like,
Hmm.
you're, a 90s baby. So
Yeah.
like the Discovery Zone
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
play space. They were much bigger format, whereas I really wanted something more intimate. I wanted something where parents could see their kiddos wherever they were so that they could truly, relax, have a
Hmm.
conversation without having to worry, what structure is, little Jimmy on? Where is
Hmm.
so and
Right.
so? So I wanted it to be, again, more intimate, and that does help keep the germs down, those smaller format spaces.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you don't really think about it, but that's like such a good idea. And going from working like under somebody else to working for yourself, doing a something that you really probably didn't have experience with. Like how did you feel confident enough and like ready enough to make that big change?
I have to be honest, I was so
Mhm.
smug. I thought, I was like, I see these places popping up and closing. It's because they don't know anything about business. They're doing something wrong. They don't have the right toys. I thought that I was going to, have instant success. And I was probably overly confident. I'm really not sure why. I think it was because I, had a master's degree. I was excelling in my job. I thought that that would automatically translate into this business. And it, like I kind of alluded to earlier, it ended up being so much more difficult than I realized. And it wasn't really for like the traditional things that you would think of. We were paying our bills. We were, super booked with parties. We didn't have a cash flow issue. It was more so my needing to overwork all the time. I no
Mhm.
longer had an off button. I no longer clocked out at 5 p.m. on Fridays. I no
Mhm.
longer had somebody above me saying, on Mondays we do this, on Tuesdays you need to turn in
Yeah.
this, on Wednesday you have this deadline. And I thought that that was kind of the life that I wanted, but it was a really difficult adjustment, especially because at my previous job, my corporate job, it was very structured, right? We
Yeah.
had time cards, even at the corporate level. We had an exact time that we had to take lunch. It was very regimented. So switching to entrepreneurship, it was like a free for all, right? And
Mhm.
nobody was looking over my shoulder, making sure I sent out an email that week. Nobody was making sure that I paid my bills on time. Nobody was telling me, okay, this is what you need to do today. I had to regulate all of that myself. And it was way more difficult than I could have imagined. I've kind of figured it out now, but it took years to really get
Mhm.
into a rhythm. And I would kind of fluctuate between working way too much and, frustrating my husband and losing touch with friends. And, I hate to say it, but, sometimes it felt like I was neglecting my kids doing
Mhm.
what I sought to do to spend more time with them. So I found
Yeah.
myself actually working more as an entrepreneur than in my corporate job. And so that came with a lot of guilt, and I had to make some changes, but it was a super hard transition. And
Yeah.
it was one that I really had to navigate kind of in the moment as I went.
Yeah, I feel like you could have like fallen off from there. You could have like felt like it wasn't right for you and maybe it wasn't the best idea for your family. Why did you keep going? Did you make some changes?
Well, I have to say I did apply for jobs like constantly just because I was
Okay.
like, this is too much. Also the fact that I had to bring my son to work with me, and I ended up getting pregnant right after we opened. I thought that, they would just play while I worked, but, within days they would get sick of the play area. They would want my
Mhm.
attention. I was breastfeeding. It was just much more all consuming than I expected. So I was
Mhm.
constantly like applying for jobs. I was like, this isn't right. And I think it honestly came down to my support system. So my husband was extremely supportive. And, I thank him every day for that. He maintained his steady job throughout this. And he said, we're fine. If you want to quit, that's absolutely fine. But, I really think you should give this a go. Even if you need to hire more, if you need to delegate more, even if that means less profit, we're going to make it. But this needs to be healthy for you. So I think it really came down to that. I did end up making a little bit less money once we hired a full time manager. But the difference that it made in my mental health and honestly my creativity, when you're in the weeds every single day in your business, it's
Mhm.
hard to innovate, it's hard to be creative. So once I realized that I can, pay someone to do the little mundane tasks that I was just repeating every single day, and I started thinking bigger, I started being the true, visionary in my business, everything kind of changed. It became enjoyable again. So I'm super thankful that I did have that support. I think that if I didn't, I absolutely would have given up. But that's
Mhm.
the other thing with brick and mortar businesses is yes, some people view them as more legitimate, but you can't just walk away from them like you
Right.
could with an online business. You
Yeah.
sign contracts, you sign leases. They can, come after your home, they can put liens on your home, they can sue you. So, you know, that was also a factor. I'm not going to lie.
Mhm.
I didn't want to have to deal with litigation. I didn't want to have to, deal with that entire process. So it was kind of a combination of things. And now, as an online business owner, if I want to take a month off, I can take a month off. I'm not going to have to pay rent. I'm not going to have to, answer to angry customers or anything like that. So I think what a lot of people don't realize when they go into brick and mortar ownership is that it's so much harder to walk away from than you
Mhm.
realize. And it's really difficult because it's always something, right?
Yeah.
With all businesses, it's always something. But with brick and mortar businesses, not only do you have to deal with your customers and, the business, you also have to deal with, plumbing and maintenance
Right.
and lawn care and snow removal. Like it really is always something. And
Mhm.
you can never just, walk away and even just have a day off unless you have your system set up. And that's, also something I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. What would you like say to somebody who's considering opening some type of thing? Like, what kind of qualities would you say a person has to have to be successful in that type of thing?
Definitely thick skin. It's very difficult, when, in an online business. That's also something you can turn off, right? You
Mhm.
can just put your phone on the nightstand for the night. You can, kind of unplug. Whereas with a brick and mortar business, it kind of comes from all sides, especially like in person. Like
Yeah.
if somebody complains or starts yelling at you through a phone or via email or a review, like that's something that you can, take a step back from. You can take a deep breath, you can regulate, you can think about your response. But when
Mhm.
someone's in person, it's really difficult to navigate those situations professionally, without ending up on TikTok, without,
Yeah.
making it worse. So for me, I'm very sensitive to rejection. I'm very sensitive to negative criticism. So I really had to learn that, okay, I can't be there in person if somebody starts, yelling at me or confronting me because I lose it. I
Mhm.
really felt like my business was almost an extension of me or almost like a third child at the
Mhm.
time. So when somebody attacked it or I perceived they were attacking it, I would get very defensive. So I would say definitely thick skin, the ability to handle criticism, not